Here I was elected as president of the society, so I'm just excited. You might have, I introduced myself in our newsletter. Some of you got that. I hope that was helpful for you. We have some of the usual characters still. We have Rachel Merrill as our vice president. Nancy Reed, wherever Nancy is, she's around. She's our secretary. Where are you, Nancy? She's our secretary. Oh, right there. Jim Payton is our program director. And Steve Osborne helps with projects. And Linda's our treasurer. And so, and we hope to expand that. I think we've been talking that it would be great to, Gene Cardell, sorry, our genealogist, and Michael, our webmaster and curator. Wow, well, I missed two real important, so you forgive me? Earlier, if you were standing next to Gene, he'll tell you that he's got over 168,000 family names in his computer system. So if you want to know anything about family history, Gene Cardell is the guy. So, and it's just, as you know, it's been wonderful over the years to see some of the things that Gene and his late wife were able to contribute to the history in Westville. Maybe before we begin, we can tell you a little bit, we'll do a little business. Our next program meeting, we have Joe Roberts coming. You know, believe it or not, that's me. Probably my wife wondering where I am.
Move your cell phone.
I'm sorry, Joe Edwards. Joe Edwards will be here, and that'll be a great meeting. We'll have more details of that coming out. Maybe for a little fun to get going, we had on our newsletter History Mystery, and believe it or not, I went out and took a picture of the house. I asked the questions, but I will admit I know nothing about the house. So I was hoping that you could help me know and identify the house on it's off of 146th Street in Oak Ridge. Now I know of two people that have, I know of three people I've talked to that have various degrees of knowledge. Like Jim kind of has, he knows what it recently was called.
In the 60s, McNamara's lived there.
In the 60s, McNamara's lived there, and what did they do there? Horses of some sort?
There were horses there, yeah. It used to be part of Two Gates, I believe.
What was it called? Two Gates or Twin Gates?
It was part of Two Gates Farm.
Two Gates Farm. Jean Roby, a realtor in the community since 1964? 69. She was telling me that she thought maybe something to do with Roy Rogers' horse, possibly.
Roy Rogers
or Gene Autry. There's some connection there.
Yeah, they raised some very famous horses.
They raised some famous horses. See how these wonderful dialogues take place?
Trotters, and Gene Autry and Roy Rogers' horses were not trotters.
All right.
So I don't know.
Well, I don't know.
Well, I think I heard this from Floyd Ressler that lived across the street.
Okay.
So that's what I told
So
him.
those are some clues. We can piece some more together. Now you have some too. You know a little bit about it. You know? No, wait. No, you don't. Where'd you go, Judy Shook? There you are. Come up here. Come up here. She was like, Alex, I think she even might have written down stuff or something. I don't know. Come up here. Tell us what you know.
This house, of course, is just north of 146th Street on the west side of the road of Oak Ridge Road, between Greyhound Pass and 146th. It was built by Mort Johnson, who was my great-great uncle. And Two Gates Farm, McNamara's, of course, bought it from the Johnson family. And the horse, Greyhound racehorse, was buried out back in a field. Granddad Johnson, my Granddad Johnson, used to show me every time we went by there where he was buried. But Mort's father, John W. Johnson's house is still there at Greyhound Pass and Oak Ridge Road. He is my great-great-grandfather. This is on my mother's side, Lillian Johnson Stanley's side of the family. So that's the story of that house. Oh, and Father Ketron, the last lone resident that I knew was Father Ketron, who lived there for several years. And I have no idea who lives there now. But he was one of the priests at Mount Carmel.
Wow, very good. Did you get that on tape, Michael?
Yep.
Well, all right, good. We'll go back through and transcript that, and then we'll go check the clues out. And you never know what we'll discover. that was terrific. Now, I'd say would everyone agree we have 3 winners of our door prizes? Yeah. All right. And I think our door prize person, we will get those door prizes to you. I think they're on the front seat of someone's car, so we'll work on that. All right. Next, we don't have really any more business. We do have, as we mentioned, a wonderful evening on the Indy500. As you know, this year, 2011, is the 100th anniversary of the Indy500, which is a real important Indiana sports experience and history experience. And so we thought it'd be great in our own little Westfield way, Washington Township way, to honor that. And one of the reasons John Blaizer's here, he wrote a book with another author, Tom Rawlings, called The Riding Mechanics, and I'll let him tell more about that. But John has been a resident of Westfield. He went to high school here and has family connections, and I'll let him, I won't spoil that for him, I'll let him tell you all that wonderful stuff. But he's just got a wonderful enthusiasm about the history of the track. And so, but how I got kind of connected with that is I've known his wife for years, and I didn't know he had the racing connection. And my wife, her grandfather, from 1908 to 1910, was a test mechanic. He was an expert on the Atlas 6-cylinder engine, which they were using on some of the first race cars, or were hoping to on some other models of cars. And so he had worked for Orville and Wilbur Wright as a machinist and an engine specialist for them. And so when they went to Carolinas, he came from Dayton to Indianapolis and was associated with that. So our family had been trying to identify if he was on record anywhere. And so I was at Christmas time, we were at a dinner at Dan's Pizza, and John and his wife was there, and the whole story come out. And here I had a connection, and so he's been looking, and we've been looking, and that brought about the invitation here. In addition to that, another one of our members, Russell Cameron, is here, and he also is has a great connection to the Indy500. And so we're going to turn the time now over to go to John, and then Russell will join in. We also, afterwards, we have some artifacts that they've brought and laid out on the table that are real special. And so with no further hesitation, John, take it away.
Well, it's great to see all of you here tonight. Like I said, I'm kind of a Westfield guy. I've spoken before several groups in the years past, and when I was invited to speak before this group, I thought about, well, you know what am I going to say? What am I going to write down? And I thought, heck, they're Westfield people. I'm going to try to make this as friendly and easygoing as possible. I didn't even prepare anything, but I will tell you some of the history of the Indianapolis 500 and Westfield's part in that a little bit, which most people don't know. So it's going to be really interesting for you to hear that. I first came to Westfield in 1962, and my father owned a little grocery store at 110 East Main Street on 32. And it was called Walker's Grocery. And I didn't see my dad in my younger years, And when I came over to spend the summer with him, I'd only been with him for about a week, and it was on a Sunday, I remember. And he said, Johnny, everybody always called me Johnny, he said, we're going to go down and we're going to watch some race cars today. And I thought, race cars? You know, I didn't know too much about race cars, so we got in his car and went down to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And there was a sight that was just unbelievable. Tens of thousands of people, these great big roaring cars going on the track. They were so loud that they would shake the stands as you were sitting there watching them. And those were called roadsters. And roadster cars are ones that had the motors in the front. And I was excited, extremely excited over that, and something just stuck with me after that. I just always was interested, started following the drivers and the cars and that type of thing. And then when I came back, I was so excited about it, I had a little bicycle. And since my dad's store was located right on 32, right on in Westville, Main Street there, I decided that I wanted to be a race driver when I got older. So how do you become a race driver? Well, you start doing fast things. So I decided there was a little crack on the sidewalk right in front of my dad's grocery store. So I set my bicycle up there, and what I did is I got me a little watch, and it had a second hand on it. So I would tell myself go, and I would take off, and I would go past Marlowe's and go back. McMullen's Funeral Home used to be there. Then I'd go up the alley, and on the right side was Dave's Printing Shop. And I'd go all the way up to Penn Street, and then I would turn left and come around where Ralph Lewis used to live, and come all the way down south there on Union Street and back around on 32, and I would time myself. And so what I was doing is I was qualifying, just like they did at the Speedway. And so that I had a great time doing that until one day I was out qualifying, and then later on the day my dad called me in and said, you know, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm qualifying for the Indianapolis 500. And he said, well, you're going to have to stop doing that. You about ran over. There's two ladies walking around the corner there, and I about ran over. So that was into my racing career, but it was just wonderful. And then in 1964, I went to the track twice, and I was in the 7th grade, and went to Westfield School, and we took a field trip down there, and we sat on the inside of turn 1, and the cars were going fast. And again, it was very exciting. And there was also, at another time in 1964, a guy by the name of John Watson lived in town. He had a son by the name of Johnny Watson. And in 1963, I played on a Little League team here in Westfield, and I helped his son. I was a pretty good baseball player, so I helped his son to teach him some of the fundamentals, and he really appreciated that. So John Watson, Sr., was from Texas. And so him and his wife, they took me down to the track with them as kind of a reward in 1964 for helping their son out. And when I went down to the track, we ended up, found out that he knew personally Jay Foyt, and he knew Paul Russo, who was a driver back then, and a couple others. So I got an opportunity to meet all these wonderful drivers when I was 13 years old. So again, I was hooked on it. So as the years went by, we went down to the track, and I remember in 1968, a good friend of ours, a good friend of the society, Joe Wheeler, and then we went with Joe Wheeler down to the Speedway, and we just had a great time and laughed, and again, a lot of great memories there. Over the years, I have been asked to speak before quite a few organizations. I've been interviewed by the Chicago Tribune, the Miami Herald, Red Book magazine, another magazine from Japan has been to my house, and wanting to see some of the memorabilia that I've collected over the years. At one time, I had the largest individual memorabilia of Indy500 in the world. And I brought some of that in and got it laid out on the table in there. And when I was collecting this stuff, there wasn't many places you could go to find drivers' helmets and old racing programs and ticket stubs. So I started asking people if there was a club or an organization that I could join. So maybe I could add things to my collection, and all these other collectors says, no, we don't know of anything. So back in 1984, I started a club. And it's called the National Indy500 Collectors Club. And it has grown to over 350 members today. Some of the race drivers are a member of it, including the personnel at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And I was its president for the first 10 years, and for the first 2 years I did everything. Collected the dues and wrote the newsletter and mailed them out all over the world. Through that venue, people started wanting to know more about the Indianapolis 500, and the newspapers and the TV stations were wanting to know more. Anything they wanted information about Indianapolis, anything they could find. So eventually, my name kind of got out there, and so they started contacting me and asking me, if they could come out and take photos of my collection and that type of thing. So it's been a good ride. For the last 20 years, I have been a consultant to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum, and I know a lot of the personnel down there, and it's just been a wonderful ride, you might say, through the years, just being associated with the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. As mentioned earlier, they are celebrating their 100th anniversary this year of the very first Indianapolis 500 race, which was held in 1911. The track officially opened up in 1909, and they held shorter races there. They held balloon races, motorcycle races, and race car races, and airplane races there. And they would have 3 or 4 events in 1909 and 3 or 4 events in 1910. And then they got the idea of having a grand 500-mile race there. And the reason the owners did that is because they were all in the car business. And they figured if they could go out and if their cars could win the race, they would get worldwide publicity over winning a 500-mile race, and they would sell a lot of cars. And so the very first race was held in 1911. And then over the years, it's just grown and grown and grown. As far as Westfield and its involvement in the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, there's a place up here on 32 right across from the school administration building, and there's a karate club in there right now, okay? And back they used to be in the late 50s and early 60s, you can probably remember this, Massey Ferguson. Is that right, Arnold? Was it Massey Ferguson was in there? Yeah. Hi, Arnold. But that was later, it was bought out later, and they sold checker taxis out of there. And in the back of the building, there was a garage where they used to work on these taxis when they would sell them and people would bring them in. What most people don't know, that there was a race car that was built there in 1965. And that race car was driven by a driver by the name of Al Miller. Now, they built this race car from the ground up, right here in Westfield. And that car was sponsored by Jerry Haldeman Ford, and it actually finished 4th in 1965 in the Indianapolis 500. And then they brought the car back here, and the car, again, they raced it in some other races, and then in 1966, they also entered the car in the Indianapolis 500 again, and it qualified 30th, and it finished 30th. It was involved in an accident early in the race, and that was the end of the reign of that car. So Westfield does have something to do with the Indianapolis 500. When I was a teenager, I used to ride my bicycle up there and visit that garage. And I can remember them building that car in the garage, even though I didn't know, a lot about the Indianapolis Motor Speedway at that time. But I used to ride my bike up there, and another fellow by the name of Denny DeMoss, who was also a racing nut. We were the only 2 kids allowed to go in there, and there was a lot of younger boys that were that went up there to kind of see what they were building, and there was just one guy that built the entire car. And then when it came to race time, then they would hire somebody to work on the car in the pits during the race. Back in those days, you could build a car in your garage. You didn't have to have a big crew of how many people, Russell?
Well, some of these teams really now are teams of 100+ people. I mean, they do a lot of teams like Andretti Autosport would run 4 cars in the series, so each car takes roughly 20 to 25 people to maintain it and prepare it and do the pit stops and other things that are necessary. So the teams have really grown, like you said, and the cars incredibly specialized. They're not built in garages anymore. They're built in big factories in Italy right now for the Dallara. So they're all aerospace technology now is really how they're all done.
So back in those days, it was really a fun time. Just another little story I can tell you. I have a question for Mr. Dennis in the back row.
Hey, what was that guy's name for Governor Baker? First name was Carol, somebody.
Oh, yeah.
Carol Horton.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Carol Horton. Yeah. And so anytime you drive by the little karate shop up there, you can just know that had something to do with Indianapolis Motor Speedway in Westville. Another thing I got to tell you, back in the early years, my dad used to have a little table in his grocery store there, and some of the older fellas in town used to come in and play checkers. And there was everything was going fine in 1962, and then in 1963. But in 1964, there was a fellow by the name of Jimmy Clark that came from Scotland. And let me tell you why. He came and he had a rear-engine car. He didn't have the motor in the front, they had the motor in the back. And these folks around town, one by the name of Hank West, and another guy by the name of Hook Gibson, may ring a bell to some of you, but they would sit in there and they were not happy. They did not like that foreigner coming over here, and his car was fast. And I can remember those guys sitting in there and talking about those foreigners coming over here and taking over the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. They did not like that. They wanted an American car, they wanted a front engine car, and they wanted an American to win that race. In 1965, Jimmy Clark won the race, and let me tell you, that did not go over well. And in 1966, a driver from England by the name of Graham Hill won the race. So that was kind of the first influx of some of the foreign drivers coming in. But in a little country town like Westville, these guys, they knew what was going on at the Speedway. And they would read about it every day in the newspaper and then watch the news at night to keep up on what was going on. So it was fun back in those days. And some of the memorabilia that I brought, I've got on the table in there. I've got a brick that was put in the Speedway in 1909. Would you like me to get? Yeah, that'd be great.
Get that uniform too?
Yeah.
I'll help you out.
All right.
But I'm fortunate enough to have a brick from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway that was put in 1909, and in 1985, in the 60s, they tore out and made an entrance on the, yeah, you can show it, right? Made an entrance, and they took the bricks out and they put them in a hill, and in the middle 80s, a hill in the third turn that they built the grandstands on. Then they built a new grandstands in the middle 80s, and they tore out all the dirt, and they also brought out some of these bricks. I'm also the author of not only the Riding Mechanics book that was mentioned earlier, but I also did some research on the bricks that came out of the track that no one had any idea where these, anything about the bricks, where they were made. And a friend and I did a 2-year research project, and we found out that the bricks, there's actually 13 different kinds of bricks that are put in the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. What they did is in 1909, when they started having races, the track was made of clay and cinder. And what they were doing is a lot of drivers were wrecking because they were going so fast and the turns were so steep. And so what they did is they were crashing and getting killed and hurt. So the Speedway in 1909, they decided to put in bricks all the way around the 2.5 miles, and it took 3.1 million bricks to go into the track. So how did they do this? they had a big race coming up in the fall, so they had 60 days to put these bricks in. 3.1 million bricks. So they contacted the Wabash Clay Company in Petersburg, Indiana, and said, we need to buy some bricks from you. And they said, oh Lord, we don't have 3.1 million, we've got, a few hundred thousand, but not 3.1 million. So what they did is they contracted out to other paving brick companies in Indiana, in Brazil, Indiana, Terre Haute, Indiana, and other places.
No, don't do that. No.
So what they did is they shipped all their bricks to Petersburg, and then Petersburg shipped them all to the Speedway, and they got them all put in the Speedway. Over the years, all that's been repaved over with asphalt, but 50, 60 years, it's all just brick that's out there. So what I did is I took this information and I put it in a pamphlet form, and we just gave it away. And Indianapolis Motor Speedway was very appreciative of that, and I gave them several hundred to pass out at different functions and things like that. Then in the about around 1989, 1990, I was at a convention here in Indianapolis the day before the race, and they usually get about 10,000 race fans come through there a day. And the fellow I was sitting with would tell me, look, this guy coming here is a little short guy. And he said that his name is Johnny Paul. And Johnny Paul was a riding mechanic that rode with the drivers actually in the cars. And they were at the Speedway from 1911 through 1937. And then in 1911 race, everybody had a riding mechanic. And the riding mechanic had certain duties in the car. Basically, he sat right beside the driver. He had to be real small and real light because they didn't want a lot of weight in there. And what his job was to push a lever in the back of the car to keep the oil pressure up during the race. And the races back in those days went 6 hours long. So this riding mechanic, this little guy sitting in the car, pumping that oil into the car with a hand lever. In addition, his job was to keep an eye on the tires on the front to make sure they didn't turn white, which meant they were losing tread, and they could blow out and cause an accident. So if they had a problem, then they would pull into the pits, and then the riding mechanics and the other mechanics would get out and change the tire, and so on and so forth. And then when I met Johnny Paul, I talked to him about his experiences racing at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in the 1920s and the 1930s. And when he walked away, I thought, it's just a shame. A lot of people know who the drivers are at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway because they got so much publicity. But these other guys who risked life and limb with the drivers never got any recognition. So I got the bright idea again of, trying to give some of these guys a little bit of credit for being part of auto racing history. So I started doing some research, and a friend and I spent hours and hours and hours at the Marion County Public Library going back through newspaper articles all the way back to 1911. And we found we matched everybody that was in the race, the riding mechanics, up with the drivers, and we published it by year. And we put it in a little booklet for them, not to make money, but to give these wonderful racing, brave people a little bit of recognition in history, auto racing history. And so the book was well received. We sold it, it's been sold around the world. It's more of a booklet than a book. Due to expenses, it's very expensive to have a big book made. Maybe somebody will build upon that someday. But I've received a lot of nice letters from some of the riding mechanics. They're almost all gone now. But their families and their grandchildren, and they're just very excited to see Grandpa's name, officially being recognized for being part of the Indianapolis 500. So it's very rewarding. So enough of that, a little bit on the history here, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. But I did bring some other memorabilia, and thanks to the guys here for bringing them out. This uniform here was worn by Rick Mears in the 1987 race, and I got that directly from Rick. It's a very highly sought after piece of memorabilia. In addition, I also brought Rick Mears' helmets here, which is probably one of the highlights of my collection. Rick Mears wore that helmet in 1982, and they had it. He was racing to the bitter end with a driver by the name of Gordon Johncock. And they got to the very end of the race, and Gordon Johncock won the race. But it was the closest finish ever of an Indianapolis 500 race. And so there was photos taken, and they were sent all around the world and printed in magazines and newspapers of that close finish. And this is the helmet that Rick was wearing in that race. So, can you go get some more, maybe some more stuff, and I can show it to them in there? Are you liking all this old history stuff? Yeah, I am. Okay. Well, I hope you like it anyway.
Well, we are a part of that history.
Yes.
Our age, we're part of history.
Yes, that's right. That's a good point.
Thank you very much.
This is a copy of the Riding Mechanics book that I produced, and it's kind of a nice little thing. And thank you guys for holding this stuff up for me. What I want to show you here is really, I brought some of my oldest and very rare stuff. If you like antiques, you'll like some of this stuff. First of all, in the Indianapolis 500, people that collect memorabilia, and believe me, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of people that love the race so much that they collect a lot of this stuff. But up here, they have what they call pit badges. And pit badges are issued to the drivers, to the mechanics, reporters, the media, and VIPs at the Speedway. And Russell's, I'm sure, got a few of them in his collection. But in my collection here, they started issuing these metal pit badges in 1938. And some are very valuable. I have a 1938, a 1941, and a 1946. And in each one of these cases, for those years, there was less than 500 made. And today, there is, of each one of those, there's probably only about 12 that's been found. The rarest one, believe it or not, is in 1946, and the 1940 pit badge is worth about $4,000. And it can, it's one of the most collectible pieces of Indianapolis 500 memorabilia there is. In that particular case, there's only been about 8 to 10 of them that's been found. And one time I had 2. So anyway, and then I just put some of the oldest in there. Starting in 1947, the Speedway issued what they called a silver badge and a bronze badge. And the silver badge was for the VIPs, and it would get you into the gates, into the garage area, and into the pits. Okay? Very, very difficult to get those unless you were directly involved with the race. The bronze badges could get you into the gate and into the garage area, only you could not get into the pits. So, and I have a complete collection of those pit badges. They still issue those badges all the way to today even. Okay, so in 2011, they'll still have these metal badges. It's just a traditional thing they do. And in 1947, they started issuing the silver badge and the bronze badge. And then your silver badge was not good on race day. You could not get into the pits unless you had what they call a backup card. So, the drivers would get one of those, and the people actually associated with the race, but you had to have a backup card or you couldn't get in to the race. And they still kind of do that today. Okay? So that's a little bit about the pit badges. I've got the 3 rarest ones in here, and then up to 1952, and I've got an example of the silver badge and the bronze badge underneath. The silver badge is the VIP, or very important ones. Next, I brought in a collection of my oldest ticket stubs from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Remember, the very first 500 was in 1911. And I've got ticket stubs from the race all the way from 1919 to present. Plus, I also have a 1914 in there. Again, very rare, you know, in the collector's circle. So you're welcome to take a look at those too. And if you one thing about the ticket stubs from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the Speedway was always held on Decoration Day. And so they wanted to always have bright colors because they wanted it to be a festive, circus-like atmosphere. And so they'd always make their programs and their ticket stubs very colorful and very pretty and spend a lot of money on them. So anyway, I've got some of the oldest ticket stubs in here, again, all the way from 1914 and then going up to 1920, the 20th race, whatever that is there. I don't see the year on that. Oh, 1932. But I thought you guys might get a kick out of seeing some of the older stuff. If you want to go ahead and show that around. This helmet here is belonged to one of my favorite drivers, believe it or not, from Scotland. His name is Jim Crawford, and this is from the 1984 race. And I just brought it in. It was kind of colorful and really kind of nice to look at. But that's the actual helmet that he wore during the race. Okay? Yeah. Russell pointed out there was a tube on the side, and they had a little, they could hear the pop-off valve in the motor actually going off, and that created more horsepower. And so, they had them regulated so they could only go off, they couldn't set it off all the time. So, but if they were trying to pass somebody, they would set that off and they could hear it in their ear. It's called a pop-off valve. The next thing I'd like to show you here is more credentials from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Russell, would you like to hold this? Sure. Yeah. And but this is these credentials here. The oldest one I got is a 1915, and then I also have some that look like little real thin plastic, and those are called celluloids. Extremely rare. And these celluloids you have to be real careful with because if you get them close to a flame, it's just like film from your camera. They'll go up just like that. And also there's some other badges, celluloids, and there's pin back buttons in there from the 20s and the 30s. Again, all very rare, and but it was a joy finding them over the years. These little thin celluloids here sell between $4,000 and $5,000 a piece. So they're so extremely rare to collectors. They're highly sought after. Thank you, Chris. Great lecture. Okay, I'm just about done here, I promise. If you would like to see the car that was built in Westfield, I brought an 8x10 photo, and I'm really proud of this. Really proud of this because it was built right here in Westfield from the ground up. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Yeah.
They displayed it on their jacket.
Well, let's see.
What do you want to do?
Okay. The last thing I think that I brought to show you all. I also have in the yearbook. I didn't have an 8x10 photo, but in the yearbook from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway is also the Westfield car is in this book too. If you'd like to take a look at it, it was actually the same car, but it was just painted a little different. Again, it was sponsored by Jerry Ullman Ford.
There's a lady back here.
Oh yeah, Mr. Gould? Yeah,
Right back there.
Oh.
We have a resident here, Sanders Glen. She had a friend that was a riding mechanic, and she mentioned his name, Mr. Gould.
Gould, yes. What was his first name? I forget. Yeah, okay, and it's Gould, right? Yes, it is. And he's listed in the book, by the way. And I actually have his autograph at home in my collection. I have one of the largest autographs of race car drivers, Indianapolis race car drivers in the world. Not the largest, but one of the largest. And I've contacted over the years a lot of the drivers, and they would send their autograph or photos and autograph photos to me and that type of thing. at the Speedway, there's been about roughly about 750 drivers there over the years, and I've got 400 of those in my collection, so, which is kind of fun. Okay, I think the last thing I got to show you here is programs from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. This program here is from the very first race in 1911. There's only 8 of those known to exist. I got a call one time when the Indianapolis Star came up to do an interview with me on my collection. And an elderly couple that lived in Nora called me up and said, John, we've got a 1911 program here, and we'd like for you to have it. We just don't know what to do with it. And so I went and visited them, the very, very nice couple, but the lady's sister and her husband was at the race in 1911. And there's actually markings in there that he had made. This program here is the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum did not have a program. So when they when they had their 75th anniversary, which is 25 years ago, they called me up and they wanted to know if they could borrow my program to take a photo of it. And they made a big poster, a 75th anniversary poster of the race. And so they borrowed this program and took a photo of it and put it on the poster. They do have one today at the museum. They eventually found one. So
How much did they pay for it?
I don't know for sure, but this program, I paid the people $250 for it at the time, which I thought was kind of a fair price. They weren't really highly sought after then, but all of a sudden the memorabilia just skyrocketed, and everybody wanted to start collecting stuff associated with the race. And today it's probably worth $3,000 or $4,000 just the one program. So I wanted to show that to you, and then inside the booklet I also have a 1914 program from the race, and a 1920, and a 1921, and a 1922, and a 1923. So I thought you guys might get a big kick out of seeing some of that kind of stuff. I have programs from 1920 to present, including the 1911 and 1914. So I'm still missing about 5. So we're still working on that. And then finally, I brought another photo this year. I've been blessed to know the people down at the museum. Every year before the race, and you never see it on TV, but they always take out some of the old cars out of the museum, some of the old race cars. And so I help the museum every morning on race day. We'll take the cars out of the museum and we'll push them out on the first turn. A couple of years is in the backstretch. And then some of the famous drivers come out and they take those cars for ceremonial laps around the track. Last year we had Tom Sneva, Ollie Leindyke, Al Unser Jr., and Johnny Rutherford came out and drove them around, the cars around. And then they drive to the start-finish line, and this is before the race. And then me and 3 or 4 other guys would go out. We pick up the cars, and then we take them back, and then we put them in the garages until after the race is over. Usually I'm the guy that's actually driving the car inside because everybody else is pretty heavy. And so, but last year I did not drive. I just helped take the cars out because one of the guys in the blue car, his nephew, was getting ready to go over to Iraq, and he wanted to drive one of the cars, so I let him take my place, so he could drive the car back, and he got a big kick out of that. So, anyway, that kind of wraps up my little presentation here. I sure hope you enjoyed it.
What year was Gould
Gould, this was 1982.
I bought John Gould's 75 New Yorker station wagon.
Oh, you did? Wow. Yeah. That's cool. So we have another connection then with the Indianapolis race. But anyway, that kind of concludes my presentation. I know Russ would like to get up and say a few words to you. I sure hope all you guys like. Any questions, first of all? David?
Tell us about the Bardocks that were also from Westfield that had quite a connection with at least the Holman family when they bought the racetrack. That's the ancestor of the people that now own the track.
That's very good. I can't give you the exact years, but during the 60s, maybe the 50s too.
46.
Oh, 46, okay.
Tony bought it.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
There was a guy that lived just south of Westfield here. His name was Thornton Bardock. And a lot of people are shaking their heads like they know who Thornton was. Thornton was a jeweler. And Thornton loved the Speedway so much that he created the winning ring and that would go to the driver and to the chief mechanic. And he became very, very famous because of that. It's called the Thornton Bardock ring. And Thornton is no longer with us, but I am personal friends with his son, Joel. And Joel is still in the business. And he just, not long ago, had a meeting with Chip Ganassi. Ganassi won the race last year in the Brickyard 400 and the Series Championship. And so he made the championship rings. Joel is working with Chip Ganassi and has made the rings for them. Another thing about Joe Bardock, I'm getting ready to apply to the Indianapolis 500 Overtimers Club. Yes, I do qualify. And it's kind of hard to get in there. It's mostly for the drivers and mechanics and the media. But with my association with the museum, I qualified to become a member of that organization. And you have to have had 20 years of service to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway somehow. And in order to qualify, it's kind of difficult to get in, but Joel Bardock is my sponsor for that. So I still see Joel today and his family. So, okay, now, okay, we got some more questions? Okay.
I don't have a question, but I have a cousin whose name was Gilbert Van Camp. His father was Frank Van Camp, who was the president of Van Camp Packing Company. And Gilbert had a fast car, and he entered one of the 1909 races that they had at the Speedway. And they had so many wrecks during practice that his father would not let him race the next day. But if you look at the Star back in 1909, I don't have a date on it, but it's you can find it. But that whole race is in there.
Oh, wow.
And it gives all the winners the next day. But I know Gilbert, there's a thing that told what kind of car he had, and I haven't looked at the article for a while, so I can't remember what kind of car.
Oh, I'd like to see that, but that would really be interesting. Yeah.
Well, it's in the Indianapolis Star.
Okay, in 1909.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Okay, thank you. Okay,
Does the Bardock family still have a business?
pardon?
The Bardock family, do they have a business in Indianapolis?
Yes, Joel works out of his house, and he lives, actually he's got a Westfield address still, and he lives just off Spring Mill Road, about 146, somewhere in there, and him and his lovely wife Priscilla live there.
I worked for them during the war.
Oh my gosh!
They had a business, I think it was off Michigan Street.
Oh, well, I'm sure Joel would love to talk to you. I just spoke to him last night. He was telling me how he's just really busy and swamped, mostly working with racing people, but with doing other jewelry things too. But I'll get your name before I go, and I'll mention it to him if you like, or I can give you his phone number. Okay?
Yeah, they had a little business there, I polished jewelry.
Oh, wow.
It was higher than we had to polish it, stone up.
Where was their office located?
I think it was off on Michigan, West Michigan, downtown.
Right downtown, West Michigan Street. Ah, see, I didn't know that. So, but the nice thing, believe it or not, a lot of these race drivers from the 50s and 60s that came up here, the night before the race, the night before the big race, Thornton would throw a big party. And many of them came right through Westfield. And we're talking Jimmy Bryan and Billy Vukovich and a lot of the famous names from the past. And they lived on Oak Road, I think is where they lived at. And but he would throw a big party, and they were all the race drivers back then. They would go to parties and drink beer and just have a good old time. And they'd go back to their hotel and get up and race in the biggest auto race in the world the next day. But many of those drivers actually came through to get to the Bardock home. Actually came through Westfield. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. We have another question back there.
Francis wanted to know how many women have raced in the 500.
I believe 5, something like that. See, there's Janet Guthrie, Sarah Fisher, Danica.
Was Milka in it? Was
Yeah, Milka.
in there?
Lynn St. James. Lynn St. James. Yeah, thank you, Barry. And so at 5, I believe, but the list continues to grow. There's more and more women getting into the 500. I was there the day that Janet Guthrie, the first woman driver, qualified, and the crowd went wild. And so they actually did get a lot of support. You think a lot of the men would be very upset over that. But when I used to go to the Speedway, women weren't even allowed in the garage area. And so, but now they have their own bathrooms in there, of course, and they're just as well thought of as a lot of the men drivers are. Okay? So, yes.
Could you share with us what movies you've been in?
Oh, you want to hear about my movie career? Who doesn't? Well, I wasn't even going to touch on this tonight, but somebody put something in the flyer. Back in 1985, I lived west of Lebanon, and there was a notice in the Lebanon Reporter newspaper that they were filming Hoosiers in Memory Hall, and they were in need of some extras. And I thought, well, that would be really something. I was 30. I said that was 85. So I'd been 34 at the time. I thought, to be able to be in a movie with Gene Hackman and that type of thing, who would ever thunk a little kid from Westfield being in a movie? So I got up and went there, and they had a lot of people come in. They even brought in kids from the local schools that let them out of school, come in to fill the gymnasium up. And so I was, somehow I ended up pretty much right behind Gene Hackman when he was on the bench coaching the team. And it was called the regional game back in those days, the regional game in the movie. And so I ended up, I liked it so much, I ended up going back the next 2 days. We worked from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. at night. And we actually got to have lunch with Hackman and Barbara Hershey and some of the other people there. Well, I tell you what, I was in hog heaven. I was, being there with all these movie stars and a little old guy from Westfield. I just had a great time. So a year or two later, when the movie came out, we went down to Glendale Cinema, which is no longer there, but we went down there to watch the movie, and we were sitting in the audience, and all of a sudden the seat came up that I was in, and there I was, right behind Gene Hackman, and so it was quite exciting to be able to do that. And about a year and a half later, they filmed another movie called 8 Men Out in Indianapolis. It's a baseball movie, and it's about the Black Sox scandal back in 1919. Thank you. And so they were asking for extras there. And so I go out to the old Bush Stadium, and they had us like in one section, and they kept moving us around where they were filming the scenes on the field. And it was just great. It was cold, and they did that on 3 separate Saturdays. And so I went down all 3 Saturdays. And then I got another bright idea that, why not send them a photo of me and say, hey, if you need anybody for a close-up shot, let me know. Yeah, I just took a wild chance. Well, sure enough, the casting director, a gal by the name of Amy, who's really pretty famous now as a casting director, called me. And she said, John, we got a spot for you. We need a reporter to come down into the dressing room with Christopher Lloyd and John Mahoney. You might remember him from Frasier. He's the older gentleman with the cane. And there was several of the big name stars. Actually, all of the Sox teams was down there. And so I was in the we get there, and there's 14 of us that they had called. And all these other guys are trying to be big-name movie stars, and I didn't want any of that. I was just there for the fun. So they took us in 3 and 4 at a time to film a scene. And so these other guys, kind of younger than me, kind of pushed their way in and let them. So I just kind of stood back. But then there was me and one other guy that was left, and we stood there all afternoon, and it was cold because we were outside. And so they asked us to come in, and so fortunately that was the scene they ended up using. And so I actually was a reporter and in a scene with John Mahoney, and all the other stars were kind of in the background. And then for dinner, since it was some of the other guys that left, it was already there, but we had a big dinner there in a tent outside. And so I go into the tent area, and I'm kind of staying back where all the cast and crew and the movie stars are eating there. So I walk in, and I've got a tray in front of me with a plate on it, and there was prime rib of all things. So they were going to feed us, and so we go walking in, and Christopher Lloyd, the guy who used to play on Taxi and was in Back to the Future, he's sitting right here with the director, John Cusack, who's a famous director, and Charlie Sheen, who you see on TV now. And so I walk in, and I'm standing there. All the seats are full. So Christopher Lloyd looks at me. I guess he felt sorry for me. I looked pitiful probably, and it'd been cold and been a long day. And he said, he goes, hey, hey, you know, kind of in that voice like he talks about. He said, would you like to sit down here? And I said, well, yeah, sure. So here I sat down here was the main principals of this famous movie, and I'm sitting here having lunch with these guys, and they're asking where I'm from. I tell them Westfield, Indiana, and they said, oh yeah, I've heard of that place. No. But anyway, it was a lot of fun, and you know, quite enjoyable to do that. There was other films. I went down to southern Indiana and did a thing, Best of the Best 3, and we filmed a scene in a little restaurant with Dee Wallace from E.T. And let's see, and then the last film I did, it's been a few years since I've done anything, is a movie called Forgive Me, Father, and I actually played a priest in that at the beginning of the movie. And yeah, but you're laughing back there. And actually, it was the first day of the shoot, and everybody was all excited, and I was the only actor. And so I got all the attention, and I got my hair cut real short, and I went down there, and they actually had a priest's outfit for me to put on. And it was filmed down 14th and Meridian in St. Peter and Paul's Cathedral. And it was done in the chapel next door. And so I went up, and so I got all the attention, and I think I had 18 lines in the film. And it's the beginning of the film. And so, but I had, in between takes, I had the crew coming up to me and say, I don't know where the director found you at. This says, you have got to be the most perfect priest we've ever seen. So that kind of made me feel good, I guess. So we filmed the movie, and I did it. He had me do it a certain way. I would have probably done it a different way, but I was supposed to be kind of real firm and real scary, kind of like, because it is a pivotal part of the movie. And so anyway, that's a little bit about the movie stuff I've done. So, but it's a lot of fun. You know, I've always believed in this life that you've got to live it to the fullest. You've got to just enjoy it. You've got to get out and do things. Don't be afraid to get out and try new things, and you know, and just be happy the best you can. And we've all lost loved ones in here, and I would tell anybody in here tonight, you wake up in the morning, be happy and smile and take life for what it's worth, because it's meant to be a gift, and life is a gift. So you enjoy it to the fullest, the best you can. It can't be perfect all the time, but life is what you make it sometime. So that's why I like to get out, and I talk to people and have fun. I'm in a business now where I also work on people that are in pain, massage therapists down at Carmel. And people that are in pain come in and see me, and it's just, they come in and they try other alternatives through the regular conventional ways of doing things, and they come in and I fix them. And I've been really blessed to be able to do that. And there's nothing better than to see a young person or an older person come in and say, "You fixed me, I feel great." And, so I can't fix everybody, but I should do the best I can. Bill, you got a question back there?
John, your dad was quite a legend around Westfield. Tell us a little bit about where he come from.
Well, my dad was kind of an eccentric, actually, but everybody seemed to like him for the most part. He was, when he was young, when he was very young, actually he came from a very wealthy family. They were contractors in Indianapolis, and actually my grandfather helped build the portrait building at the Indiana State Fairgrounds. They also built a lot of apartments on North Illinois Street, North Delaware Street. He had kind of a rough start, even though he came from a wealthy family. His father was out in the field one day. They also built cisterns. Remember cisterns around? Well, he built those. And he was out in the field someplace, and he got bit by a mosquito. And he died, he got meningitis and died at St. Vincent's Hospital here in 1925. And so that was real tough on my family. My dad had a sister and a brother, and he was the oldest. And and 6 months later, his mother died of a broken heart. And for anybody that my dad would never talk about that. He always told me she had stomach cancer, but I found out later on that they were so much in love that she died of a broken heart. And so that was real tough, real tough on a young boy back then. And during the time, my dad had a stuttering problem. And a lot of people would kid him about it. He seemed to take it pretty much ingrained, but before his mom and dad died, they sent him to a school up in Iowa to help with that and gave him some hints on what he could do about it. He got that stuttering problem when he was a little boy. They had a maid, and they lived down on College Avenue, down around Butler. And this maid came in, and she stuttered. And what happened was, he started mimicking her. And for some reason, it stuck with him. And he had the affliction his whole life. So whether that's a payback for, making fun of somebody or trying to mimic somebody, who knows? But that's why he had a stuttering problem. He worked here at Van Camp's in Westfield, and also for Talbot Rossler Lumber Company as a bookkeeper. And he later ended up buying a little grocery store in 1941 from a guy by the name of Dick White. And he had that store for 45 years. He helped a lot of people out over those years. I can remember when I first came to live with him, hobos would come through town. Do you remember hobos? They would actually, you remember? Yeah, they would come through on the old Monon Railway out here. And somehow word got out all across the country. You could stop in at Walker's Grocery in Westfield and he would give you a sandwich. And we saw a lot of hobos coming in, and he would always feed them. He'd always feed them. And then there was a lot of other townspeople that came in and didn't have money to buy groceries, and he'd give them on credit. And many of them didn't pay, but he just let it go. It was okay to help people. So when he passed away, there was a lot of nice people in Westfield came out and said, "Boy, your dad just did the world for this town and for the people here." And so that was just much appreciated. In his earlier years, he rode a motorcycle all the way out to Los Angeles, California, where his sister lived. And he got a job on a tramp steamer. And it was a Norwegian freighter. And he was the only person to speak English on the entire ship. And so they went all the way to Hawaii, and then to New Zealand, and Australia. And then they came all the way back. And so that was a nice journey for them. And while he was out in Los Angeles, he worked for a decorator out there, and they actually went into several of the famous people's homes back then. I can't remember, like Mary Astor, I think he went into, and I know you remember a lot of the famous people back then. But a lot of those homes he went into to do decorating. And he actually got to meet a few of them through those years.
Now, didn't your dad have a parrot?
Oh yeah, everybody wants to hear the parrot story. Yes, he had a parrot. Back in the early 60s, I can remember he would take this parrot and he would put it in a bird cage, right, Bill? And in a big old bird cage, and he, on a nice warm summer day, he would set this bird cage out on the street. And so this parrot talked. And so one day, he was outside, his name was Teddy, and Teddy was outside, and he was, my dad was at the front window, I think he was washing the window, and Teddy also whistled. And there was these two young ladies who were walking by, and Teddy whistled at them, and needless to say, they turned around and they thought it was my dad whistling at them. Called him an old guy, quit whistling at us and all this kind of stuff. True story, because I actually was there and saw it happen. So anyway, yeah, that was my dad, and he took good care of me while I was here, and helped me get through school at IU. And so I appreciate you bringing that up, Bill, and let me tell a little bit about him. So.
I have a little story about your father. You remember Warren's Restaurant? Warren's Restaurant?
Yes.
All right. Your father would come out from his grocery and in the back door there. He always knew the day he had cheese and potatoes. And he'd bring his plate and he'd say, look, you boy, put 50 cents worth on here and I'll take care of the rest of it.
Yeah. I've never heard that, but that was great. Yeah. My dad was what you call a character. And, but you know, those people, it takes all kinds of people to make up the world. And for the most part, he enjoyed life and, you know, enjoyed helping people. He liked making a buck. He was a penny pincher, let me tell you. You know, when I used to go to the high school basketball games, he'd give me a dime when I go to the basketball game. He said, go have a great time. You couldn't buy anything for a dime, but, you know, but that's the way it worked. But I always had Gene Roby there to kind of bail me out and buy my popcorn for me. So. But anyway, it was sure nice talking to you guys, and I'm glad I didn't really prepare anything. I wanted to come up. Westfield's a great town, and of all the people I've spoken to over the years at their different Lions clubs and other organizations, I so far look forward to this one because I'm back home again. So thank you very much for having me.
Russell,
Really great.
come on
Well,
up
that's a
and tell
tough
us.
act to follow. A movie star that has a lot of great stories. I'm not sure I'm going to do well, but I'll keep it brief. I'm Russell Cameron, and I really appreciate coming in tonight and sharing my stories with you. I come from a little more modern era of Indy car racing at Indianapolis and that series, and those were also wonderful times. My career in racing is effectively over. I'm a father now. I'm in the community as a business owner, and I'm very happy to be here in Westfield. I love calling it home here. I also want to tell you that I have a lot of colleagues that I spent my racing career with that make Westfield home. They also love Westfield, and I stay in pretty close communication to my old colleagues in racing, and it's just, you know, it's fun to live through them now. Now my focus obviously is my family and the community, but I've also brought a few things with me I'd like to just share. I have a couple of rings from my time in racing. I was lucky enough to be on a team that won the Indianapolis 500 in 1992 with Al Unser Jr. It was a wonderful day. We weren't the fastest car, but we were a survivor, that kind of a car. It was a cold day, if you remember that race, a lot of accidents, and Al Jr. Beat Scott Goodyear to the stripe, and it was also a very close finish. So I have that winner's ring here, and then in 1995, I was fortunate enough to be chosen by my peers to be selected as the rookie chief mechanic of Indianapolis in 1995. So I have that ring as well. So I'd like to pass those around. You can have a look at it, see what those look like. And then this,
Make sure
you can help Bruce. Yeah, sure. This big poster board behind you that I hope you can see was a race in 1997. It wasn't at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but it was a significant day because it was a world record that we set.
We set this world record in California with the team. That was a qualifying average speed on a 2-mile oval, 240.9 miles an hour. And we actually did an average speed of 243 that morning in practice, and then that's what we did in qualifying. And we won the race that day as well. So it was a wonderful day. And then I have a couple of other pictures, but you can help yourself to those if you make it into the memorabilia area. I know there's dessert back here, and that's much more important than some of the stories I have, but I would like to, if you have questions about my time, I'd be more than happy to entertain any questions you may have.
Did you say the cars were made in Italy?
Yeah, the way the series is currently structured, about early 1970s, really, cars started to be produced in England. And they went from that rear engine design that were really tubular framed cars. They became structures made like airplanes that were made with modern materials. So new cars are made with carbon fiber. And I brought a piece of it with me, so if you want to have a look at what carbon fiber looks like in a raw form, how light and strong it is, that's how it's done. So the current Dallara chassis that's produced for the IRL today is built in Italy. Now, the Indiana Economic Development have recently awarded a nice amount of money to Dallara to build a factory in Speedway, Indiana. So they're going to build a $6.5 million facility in Speedway, and they're going to begin at the end of the year assembling those Dallara chassis here in Indiana. So that's the first step in the right direction to try to pull some jobs into Indiana. It's really surprising how many people make very good living in auto racing here in Indiana. There are so many teams all the way from the top level of Indy Racing League to Indy Lights, Formula Mazda, sprint cars, midgets. I mean, there are a lot of racing professionals in the state of Indiana. So, it's a really big part of our economy. And like I said, Westfield enjoys some of that as well, because a lot of those race team owners, managers, mechanics, engineers have made Westfield their home.
There's one right up the street here on Sterling Street.
Is that Mr. Mockler?
Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Mockler. Yeah, that's right. Well, any other questions? And I will turn it over to Bruce and let you have your...
and I'll turn it over to Jim.
Okay, great. All right, well, here you go, Jim. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you, Russell. That's a great accomplishment. Bruce gets to introduce people, and I'm afraid I have to say close and say goodbye, which I hate to tonight, because John has given such a fabulous program tonight. I'd like to give him another hand of applause, please. He brought back a lot of memories for me, and I'm sure he brought back a lot of memories for some of you folks out there also. Some of those things I just completely forgot about until he brought them up, especially some of the names. I was trying to think of the fella that had the car, Carol Horton, because we used to go there also. But we were a little bit younger, and you're right, he wouldn't let us around much. But he was a very eccentric fellow, I remember, and he could almost make anything work. His philosophy was, it didn't matter if it was Chevrolet, Dodge, or Chrysler. He'd interchange parts. When guys come here to try to get something fixed, he'd go, well, just go down and buy a Chrysler starter and grind this off. He'll go in there, I don't know how that works, but, the guy was amazing. And didn't he also build car washes? Someone built some car washes in there later, and I was thinking it was him.
Yeah, I think it was. Now
Yeah.
you mentioned it, yes.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
A lot of things happen in a little small community that people forget about, and it's great that we have someone like John come back and kind of jumpstart our memories, because you like to remember those stories and keep them for the future generations, and that's what the Historical Society is all about. So I'd like to thank all of you for coming here tonight. We do have some refreshments. Please help yourself. Stay a little bit, talk to everybody. I'm sure John will entertain any more questions if you have some for him. And go out and look at the memorabilia. If any of you get time, please come up and visit our museum. It's open on Saturdays from 11 to 3. And you're more than welcome to come up and talk to the staff that's on duty there. They'll try to answer any questions you have. Anything else? Anybody have any questions other than that? What, for John? Okay then. Thank you again for coming.
A little bit about your answer.
Okay. Yes.
Somewhere along the line.
Oh, yeah. You have. You like? Oh, I'll start. Is that Surrey County?
No, it's North. Yeah, the first one's
Oh, Randolph?
No,
Okay.
Tell me your last name.
Russell Cameron. Yeah.
Oh, I got the rust, but I didn't hear the rest.
It's probably
My grandson, I know about this.
I can give that to you. What happened? I can give it to you.
You know what I'm doing for the 100-year celebration? I have my father's 1959 Imperial, and the Speedway have asked me to bring it.